The topic I'd like to talk to you about now is managing user and service accounts. Now, one of the most basic functions of a Windows Service Administrator is to manage network access for users. Every day, users have to access the network to share files, to print documents, and to get to the internet. So a secure network requires that a user has a username with a password that goes along with it. And that's how they log on to the network. All of that information, as well as additional info, is included in the Active Directory database. Since the user account is the user's key to accessing everything in your environment, you'll find that it becomes a daily task that you need to work with these user accounts. You'll be creating them, you'll be deleting them, you'll be disabling them temporarily. You'll need to assign rights to these accounts so that people have access to specific resources out on the network. So we're going to take a look at all the aspects that go along with this. Now, the other type of accounts that you work with are service accounts. Just as with users, services and applications have a need to access resources on the network. Those accounts are referred to as service accounts. The accounts in Windows Server 2012, we actually can create a specific kind of account called a managed service account. Now, that makes it easier to maintain accounts for multiple applications across multiple servers. These managed service accounts remove a lot of the headaches that we've had with previous versions of the operating systems when we were trying to manage services. So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at how to work with both kinds of accounts. Because you'll work with user accounts more often than with service accounts, and we're going to cover those first in this topic. After some practice, you're going to find that creating user accounts is really quick and easy. When you install the Active Directory domain services, there are two user accounts that are created by default: the administrator account and the guest account. The administrator account can be used to administer the enterprise. It's got the highest level of permissions, and you'll see that it has membership in the domain admins group as well as in the enterprise administrators group. Because it is so powerful, it's very important that you keep it secured, that you keep it safe. The guest account, you're going to be able to use that for guests. Right? So essentially, anybody who needs limited access to your network on a temporary basis. When you install and you create this guest account, it's actually disabled by default. So if you want to use it, you have to first go into the Active Directory users and computers, and you'll have to enable it. Now, because there are only two default user accounts created during the installation of Active Directory, you're going to need to create user accounts for any user that will need access to your domain resources. And that means just about anybody in your own organization, and perhaps people from outside of your organization. So a user account in the Windows Server 2012 Active Directory actually has 363 properties. You can think of properties as being like fields of information in the database. Now, these are organized into 13 different categories or property sets. Most of them are optional when you're creating a new user account. Some of the values are actually generated automatically by the system when the account is being created. As an administrator, you'll then need to go back and fill in the blanks with some of the other info. With the exception of the secured properties, such as the password, all of the different properties are searchable across your entire organization. Now, as you create a new user account, you probably noticed that only a few of the user's properties could be filled in during a time of creation. We'll be doing some demos a little bit later, and you'll see how all of this works. But you can always go back and add all of these other property information at a later time. You'll have things like phone number, department, organization, email address, Active Directory codes, and things of that nature. All of that can be added in at a later time. The example that I have here on the slide, you'll see here that there's a get AD user administrator. This is actually a PowerShell command. Now, you can modify your user account properties in a couple of different ways. You can use the Active Directory Users and Computers tool, and that's the GUI-based version. You'll see an example of that up on the slide. You'll also see dsmod listed there. That's a command line tool. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But with PowerShell, we have the ability to do these noun-verb capabilities. It's almost like just using regular English to tell the computer what to do. So if I wanted to get information about the Active Directory user, I would simply use the getAdUser commandlet. And then I would put the name of the user. The kinds of things that are going to be automatically generated and required inside of a user account when it's being created are shown on this slide. So you've got the first name, the last name, the display name. So the display name is just actually how it appears in Active Directory. The name itself, when we just say name, we're really talking about putting together the first name and the last name to create the full name. We have something called a distinguished name. Now this is going to be very, very important to the Active Directory environment. We're going to talk about how distinguished names are created a little bit later. The user principal name is a special kind of name that is here for backward compatibility with some of the earlier operating systems. It began really being used in Windows Server 2000, and it's usually formatted as and looks exactly like the user's email address. Okay. In a pre-Windows 2000 environment, we used what was called the NetBIOS name for logging on. That was also referred to as the SAM account name. So the example there that we see on the slide is just a simple Joe S, whereas the user principal name is joes@fuller.com. Now you can create new user accounts using a number of different tools, all of which we are going to be looking at in this course. Active Directory Users and Computers has a new user wizard. There's also a new graphic interface tool that came around with Windows Server 2008 that still exists, and it's called the Active Directory Administrative Center. Now, the Administrative Center allows you to do pretty much everything that Active Directory Users and Computers allows you to do, but it gives you additional capabilities as well. Some of those we'll be talking about later on in this class. We're going to be taking a look here at PowerShell commandlets and how we use those to create user accounts and to modify and work with those accounts. One thing I do want to point out to you about PowerShell, as we move through the course and all of the different topics, I'll be referencing PowerShell commandlets that match the GUI methods of doing things. The main reason that I'm doing this is because if you are preparing for an examination, you'll be expected to know not just the GUI methods of doing things, but also the PowerShell commandlets and the syntax for doing those same kinds of tasks. PowerShell is really important because it gives you the ability to automate things and to script things out. So it's important to know how to do things both ways. You'll be tested on both. We'll also be taking a look at some of the directory service commands that have been around for a while. They are being deprecated out or removed by Microsoft from the operating system moving forward, but they still are useful, so we'll make sure that you know about those. The net command is not new, but it can now be used for creating domain level user accounts. And then we have two final tools that are listed here that we'll take a look at. The CSVDE and the LDIFDE or LDIFDE. We're going to look at each of these. PowerShell 3 is the version of PowerShell that comes with Windows Server 2012. And this has given us some new commandlets for managing the Active Directory environment, specifically user accounts. You'll see 5 of those listed here. Now these are certainly not all of them that are available, but I wanted to just give you kind of a preview. GetAdUser would let you find information about various user accounts based on search criteria that you type in. GetAdUser resultant password policy would pull the password policy that would apply to that specific user. New AdUser creates an account, remove AdUser, removes the account. And then setAdUser is the commandlet that you would use to modify the Active Directory User Accounts property sheet. So let me use the getAdUser commandlet to show you the syntax for some of the common kinds of commands that you would do, or the things you would do with PowerShell. The first example retrieves information about the administrator account. So it's just very simple. GetAdUser followed by the name of the account. The next example uses the -filter parameter to get all of the Active Directory users. We're using -filter with an asterisk here, which is a wildcard. The next example would find all of the users in the city of Lusaka. Note that the entire filter condition is actually enclosed in single quotes, and then the city of Lusaka is in double quotes. The next example would find all of the users whose last names begin with a W. If you're unsure about the actual name of a property, or you'd like to see a complete list of the properties, use the dash properties parameter. In this example, since all of our user accounts will have the same properties, just different values, we can do a search on only the administrator account. So basically, get AD user administrator followed by dash properties and an asterisk. One of the beauties of PowerShell, one of the things that I really like, is that you can take the output of one commandlet and pipe it or feed it into another commandlet. The next example takes the output from the getAdUser and feeds it into the format table commandlet, which then is presenting the output as a table rather than as a long list. Now finally, you can specify which properties you want to see in the table by listing them, separated out by a comma. The final example here produces a table of all the users showing their name, their department, the city, and the state. Now, if you want to get more information about PowerShell, if you're really new to it, there's a link here on this slide that will take you to getting started with PowerShell out on Microsoft's TechNet.